look during the 20 years since I started in Formula One, it's fair to say that at that point it was very much based on drawing boards, intuition, finger in the air, conversations around the coffee machine. And what data analysis there was pretty basic. So telling you engine parameters, throttle position, things like that. Back when I started, we had 3 buttons on the steering wheel for the driver to use. One of those was rather unfortunately named the kill switch. I don't think you should have anything that says kill on a racing car steering wheel. The other being a drink button, which is always a handy thing to have when you're thirsty during a Grand Prix. And the other one was a pit limiter. So there was very few parameters that you could actually alter once you had taken to the track, and very little that could be analysed when you were off the track. And if you sort of go through the next 5 to 10 years of development and you come to today, if you looked at a modern steering wheel in Formula One, it's got 40 odd knobs and buttons and dials that the driver can self-engineer the car. All of that information is harvested, sent real time back to the pits, looked at by a team of data engineers in the back of the garage. It's also sent back via satellite to control centres, whether it's Ferrari and Maranello or whether it's McLaren and Woking. So you've got another group, another team of people analysing that data. Because clearly one of the big issues with a lot of data is being able to actually take the good bits. A lot of it is fairly benign health checks telling you that engine temperatures are in the right operation window, brakes and the likes. But the real interesting stuff is anything that's going to give you performance. And in the case of Formula One, our business is Grand Prix racing, and Grand Prix racing happens 19 or 20 times a year. It's obviously a 365-day-a-year industry in terms of the development of the car, the manufacturing, all of that. But where we actually go in the marketplace is racing, then you've got 19 or 20 opportunities to be best in class, top of the class, and market leader. So you really focus a lot on trying to not only harvest as much data as possible from the car, suspension movement, brake pressure, pitch, yaw, airspeed sensor to correlate against actual track speed, so you can work out direction of the wind, so very much like an aircraft, because that has an effect on the aerodynamic performance. So many parameters that will be of interest to the engineers and of course ultimately the driver, because the end user, the customer if you like, is the man behind the wheel. And no amount of data can give you confidence if you don't have the feel. But a large part of building confidence in driving a racing car is getting the data, building the relationship with the engineer, translating that data into information which becomes a common language for Formula One that ultimately will give you performance. And it doesn't matter whether it's Grand Prix racing or whether it's advertising or whatever product or service you're providing to a customer. It's all about being ultimately first to market, best in class, and having a sustainable success profile, which will see you have continued business. There's many examples, isn't there, in business where someone got a rather large mobile phone between my legs, and if you look at the early mobile phone manufacturers that have gone by the wayside, that were great products in the beginning, but for whatever reason they weren't able to be ahead of the curve in terms of developments, and presumably a lot of that is because they weren't harvesting the right data. Well, I think the one thing that maybe separates Formula One from other businesses that are harvesting huge amounts of data, and they've got the real issue of storing all that data and processing it continuously. In Formula One, the data tends to be year relevant, and therefore a lot of what would have been relevant to the operations of the cars and the performance 2 years ago, actually because of regulation change, because of the speed of development, isn't really relevant today. Now, of course, you don't wipe the slate clean at the end of every year, but the need to hold on to historical data beyond a couple of seasons is not as important as it would be in other businesses, where basically the more touch points, the more information you have on consumers, the better the software is ultimately going to process, what is the right outlet for an advertiser, or what is the right product to be showing on whatever site it happens to be. So I think that Formula One, although it's large amounts of data, in motor racing terms and in auto terms that's being transmitted back and forward to the car. I believe it's something like 700 million numbers of data during a Grand Prix is transferred from the car back to the pits. And I'm told that that's more than an average person will speak in his lifetime, which may or may not be true, but I believe what I'm told. So it's an impressive amount of data for a 90-minute Grand Prix, and it's not just being sent for the sake of it. It's obviously being sent because it's telling you about the health of the car, it's telling you about the performance of the car, but more importantly, it's updating parameters that will help you make better decisions on strategy, which is also being run through various software programs to try and make sure that you're ahead of your competition. Should there be a safety car, should there be a yellow flag, should there be traffic, anything that's going to impact on the pace of your competing car, that is going to have an impact on the next 20 minutes of that Grand Prix, and it can make the difference between success and failure. So Grand Prix racing tends to be very focused on the here and now, because tomorrow is too late. We don't have the chance to reflect on the performance and come back the next day and rerun the Grand Prix. So you've got to make sure you're harvesting and taking performance out of the data during the actual event itself. Whether it's you and I in our everyday lives embracing new technology and filtering what technology works for our lives and makes our life better. What technology works for you may be something that doesn't work for me because we have a different lifestyle or different likes and dislikes. But in motor racing, anything that gives you performance will be embraced by the driver. But ultimately, the driver has to decide when to brake, when to accelerate, when to turn for the corner, how to react to all of the varying parameters that you have when you're going around a racetrack: wind, heat, other cars, turbulence. And you have to take that into account when you're filtering the data. And of course, the more you develop the software and the more you can actually improve and get a better understanding between the programmers and the engineers, the better that data becomes at directing you to a solution, rather than you having to sort of sift through lots and lots of data to try and find a solution. And in the beginning, it was very much the driver pushing the engineer towards a certain point on the racetrack to try and drag out some response from the data, some response that will give you performance. Whereas, of course, as it's become more sophisticated, to the point today where the engineers will advise the driver while he's on the racetrack to make an adjustment because of a braking issue, or to brake earlier for a certain corner, to get on the power earlier, to change the gear he's using. So it's actually something that's being reviewed right now because it's being seen as driver coaching, which some people would say takes away from the actual driving experience. I don't see it like that, because ultimately the scenery is still moving at 200 miles an hour, and it's still the driver that has to decide how to take in that information, whether it's data that's being beamed to his dashboard or whether it's coming through the radio transmission telling him what to do. You still have to be able to do it. I can't kick a football particularly well. A professional could explain to me the process, but it isn't going to make me a good footballer just because he's explained it to me. So ultimately, the reassuring thing is that all of this data and all of the packages that are used in everyday life are developed by people, even if they are self-learning because somebody's programmed it that way, but it's taken a human interaction to make that happen. And it will continue to take human interaction. So I don't think we're going to go out of fashion. I think we'll always be required at some point. Can you have a self-driving car? Of course you can. They exist. If you go to Heathrow and you park your car, you have these little trains that take you back and forward. It's not complicated to do something like that. But ultimately, we don't want to be taken out of the loop in every aspect of life, because that's part of life. It has to evolve, of course, and what's important to you and I won't be as important to our children because they've grown up in a different time. But ultimately, the basic needs of the human race is the same.